is Anuj Tewari. I work with Axis Bank cybersecurity team, and I take care of my daily bread and butter is to recommend and review cybersecurity controls, payment security controls, and give recommendations how to secure our customers, how to maintain the trust between the bank and the customers. So today we'll be discussing about how payment security for the payment products have evolved and is evolving. We will be discussing about various types of payment products and the payment security controls which has been implemented and is currently in place. Some key highlights which we want to discuss is the digital growth which India and other South Asian countries have seen. If you see the numbers, 13.2 billion digital transactions which has been carried out in financial year 2024, which is a humongous number. There is a lot of data involved in it. To secure this data, customer trust, payment security controls are now mandatory. There are various regulatory frameworks, regulatory bodies for each type of payment products. There is a Reserve Bank of India for India. There is a SEBI for securities. We have separate insurance regulators for insurance-related products. So we have a different regulators for different type of payment products. Also, there is a emerging trend in threats. The threat landscape is changing because there is a adoption of digitalization. More digital payment products are being included for providing the convenience to customers. With convenience comes the responsibility to secure the data and the payment products. Security innovation, which is basically implementation of AI/ML-based fraud detections and authentication mechanisms, which we'll discuss in details for various payment products. We'll quickly have a look at the market overview. If you see, Indian payment security market is growing, and it is growing at a very fast pace. By 2030, it will reach around $10 billion US, with growth rate of almost 16% CAGR. Certain key drivers are digital payment adoptions, regulatory compliances, fraud preventions. If you see the Asia-Pacific leadership, almost 24% of the global market share for the payment security is there. Leading countries, China, India, Japan, South Korea, and fintechs who are also facilitating payment security are also being considered as part of the innovation hub. Few growth drivers, which you can see, increasing digital frauds, evolving cyber threats, landscapes, different types of cyber attacks, regulatory compliances, data protection requirements, regulations across various countries, and last but not the least is the consumer trust. Let's discuss about few regional payment ecosystem, payment products. India has a now major one, which is basically UPI, which is Unified Payment Interface, where we do almost around more than 13 billion transactions on a monthly basis. IMPS is one of the payment channel or a protocol, which is basically immediate payment services, where the beneficiary gets the money immediately when it is being transferred from a payee. Then we have a RuPay card network, which is growing, and in some of the years, it will become equivalent as Visa, MasterCard. We have digital wallets. We have also introduced digital rupee few years back for the convenience and as an innovation product. Then we have contactless payments, which is basically NFC, near-field communication technology enabled. Southeast Asian payment landscape, Bangladesh has Nagad Mobile Financial Services. Sri Lanka has Lanka Pay as a major payment product. Nepal has Nepal Payment Systems, Khalti, eSeva as a payment products. Okay, moving on to the most important UPI. So UPI is Unified Payment Interface. 7-8 years back, this product was introduced, and this has made India as a cashless economy, which means even a small vendor or a merchant accepts payments through this UPI. So there is a very less involvement of cash. The adoption of technology has increased. Even a small person or a novice can use this UPI app to accept the payment or do a payment transactions. With, again, convenience, there comes a responsibility of security. So to protect this unified payment interface product, there we have built multiple line of securities. So you have multi-layer securities architecture, starting from device binding, where you have to link your mobile device with the application. SIM binding, your SIM is also binded with your mobile application. So while authenticating a user, your device as well as SIM is authenticated to give the access to the UPI ecosystem. You have biometrics authentication as a fingerprint, face recognition enabled to access the UPI. And as a two-factor authentication, basically as UPI has a specific unique PIN, plus it has a device authentication, which means something you are and something you know as a two-factor authentication. Coming back to transaction security controls, we have transaction level security limits involved. There's a real-time fraud monitoring solutions, AI ML algorithms implemented for the transactions. You have a collect request validation, which is a time-bound request for accepting the payments. Last is the merchants who are accepting the payments through UPI, they have to complete their KYC, which is your know your customer process. Now coming to technical safeguards, your end-to-end information is secured using TLS 1.2 and above protocol. Tokenization is in place. The most important, which is your API security, JWT tokens, OAuth 2.0, those are all mandated and implemented as part of this UPI implementation. And there is a dedicated secure network for UPI ecosystem. So there are players, there are TPAPs, there are PSPs, there are TSPs, there are ASPs, there are multiple partners as part of this UPI ecosystem, which creates a dedicated network to carry out the transaction. Let's move to the next type of payment security product is your cards, debit cards or credit cards. These cards have been there from 2000, 2003 onwards as a payment product. However, the usage, the fraud has increased and the type of frauds also have been evolving and changing. So as a payment security controls from 2013, 2014 onwards, EMV chip technology has been introduced, which basically provides you a dynamic data authentication. When you're carrying out a transaction, it gives a unique transaction code for each transaction. You can do an offline PIN verification, which is a secure method. Application cryptograph for transaction security. And then certificate-based authentication between an issuer and a card authentication. Coming to online transaction security, there is a 3D secure protocol. Now this 3D secure protocol has been upgraded to 3D secure 2.0, which gives you an enhanced authentication and a risk-based decisions. One-time password now has been adopted and being implemented by various countries across the world. Earlier, the cards were accepted only using card number, CVV, or expiry date. But now many of the countries have adopted one-time password to carry out to complete the entire payment transaction as an additional factor authentication. Device fingerprinting, which means your device binding, device fingerprinting means taking the details of your laptop or a desktop or a mobile phone to carry out behavioral analysis to detect certain types of frauds. Velocity checks like the transaction limits, amount monitoring, all those controls have been put in place for the cards. In India, there is a very detailed guidelines which every issuer bank has to follow to implement the velocity check, the geographical check, various fraud parameters to implement it. Then, as we are discussing these PCI compliances are now being mandated by regulators for all the issuers and acquiring banks. So PCI DSS, PCI PIN, PCI HSM, PCI P2P, PCI PTS, these are all mandatory and every issuer bank has to comply on a regular basis. Then there are certain regulator mandated controls, which is your additional factor authentication. For every transaction, additional factor authentication is mandatory in India. You have a transaction monitoring. There is a dedicated fraud risk monitoring engine which runs behind the card system, which taking certain parameters identify whether it is a genuine transaction or a fraudulent transaction. Merchant category codes, this is basically certain type of merchant category codes are restricted or blocked so that they'll not be allowed to carry out any transactions if card is being used. Chargeback mechanism has been improved from a manual to an automated. So you'll see that the chargeback cycle, which is of 120 days, has been reduced to 7 days. Let's move to another type of payment security product, which is your mobile banking and internet banking. So mobile banking applications are now being very much used to make payment transactions, to transfer money. And the frauds related to the internet banking and mobile banking also have been increased. There are frauds which basically attack or bypass the authentication mechanism. So now regulators have mandated banks to implement multi-factor authentication to access the mobile application, to access your internet banking application. Also, while carrying out a transaction, multi-factor authentication is mandatory. Biometric login as an option has been given to customers. You can use your face recognition, you can use your fingerprints to access mobile banking as well as internet banking. Yes, for internet banking also, biometric authentication is being enabled. Device registration, this will allow the transaction or access of your mobile banking or internet banking for a specific devices, mobile devices or laptops or desktops. Session management, this is basically automatic timeout and session encryption. The most important is virtual keyboards, CAPTCHA, and adaptive authentication has been mandated for all issuer banks in India. So what is virtual keyboard is basically, virtual keyboard prevents any password capture through any keyloggers. If keyloggers are installed in your laptops or desktop, virtual keyboard will help you protecting your password. CAPTCHA will help you from preventing from any bots, any DDoS attacks, DOS attacks. Adaptive authentication is basically, it will identify the behavior of your device, it will identify the behavior of a user, basis that it will give you a step-up authentication. So if you access your mobile banking or internet banking from any different environment, web browser or laptop or any other environment, it will ask you a OTP or additional factor authentication. That is called as adaptive authentication. Transaction security has been in place. Digital signatures, PKI-based transaction signing is in place. Transaction limits are there, where customers are now allowed to configure the transaction limits for mobile banking and internet banking. Beneficiary management, geolocation verification is also in place. There are certain countries from where you can restrict the transactions not to be carried out. Mobile application security, there are additional parameters, which is basically containerization, which means your mobile application should have a capability to run as a mobile device management solution. It also should have an anti-malware capabilities. So now in India, the mobile banking payment solutions are integrated with mobile device management to give these functionalities and security controls. Data localization, RBI guidelines with respect to digital banking security, there is a specific master direction on digital payment security, which has been released in India in 2021, which every bank has to comply with and adhere to. We'll move to another form of payment security, which is being used is digital wallets. It's a PPI, prepaid payment instrument, which means you have to preload the PPI wallet, and you can use it at a merchant location or transfer it. So for that, there are certain account security-related controls, which is KYC verification, know your customer verification. Wallet limits are applied to wallets on a daily basis or a monthly basis. Device authentication, as I mentioned, device binding is mandatory for wallets, biometric security. Transaction level controls are also in place, which is basically real-time monitoring, velocity checks, merchant verifications. There are specific PPI guidelines issued by regulators, which has to be adhered to all the wallet issuers in India. Next type of payment control is basically RTGS, NEFT. These are all payment protocols, which means your real-time gross settlement or national electronic fund transfer, which means if you want to transfer a large amount of money to some organization or a specific person, you can use RTGS. And if it is a less amount, you can use NEFT. These are all real-time payment transactions. They have a dedicated network and a dedicated channel. There is also a message code which is being used similar to SWIFT to carry out certain transaction, and these message codes are also authenticated, and there is a integrity implemented for all of these message codes to maintain their security. There are regulatory frameworks, oversights available, operational controls like maker-checker process, 4I principle to carry out RTGS-related transactions. Bank authentication is in place. There are certain transaction limits for each of these implementations which are there. Next is cross-border payment methodology, which is basically SWIFT is one of them. SWIFT is also now evolving. Now SWIFT has a specific message codes. It is now standardizing their message codes by using ISO 20022 format, which every bank has to implement, which will give a uniform codes for doing a message transfer across the countries. And every bank in India has to comply with SWIFT customer security program on an annual basis, at least. It also has a message authentication process. There is also a 6I principle involved in carrying out a SWIFT transaction. So there is a maker, there is a checker, and there will be a verifier to secure the entire transaction. There are certain emerging technologies like blockchain through which this cross-border payment transactions have been implemented. Now there are certain mobile applications which are being allowed to carry out the cross-border transactions on a real-time basis. So currently this cross-border transaction takes at least T+1, T+2. However, going forward, I think this will be completed on a real-time or a near real-time basis, the transactions. We'll quickly discuss about the regulatory landscape and compliances. We have a Reserve Bank of India as a regulator in India. All banks have to follow the framework circulars which Reserve Bank issues. So there is a Payment and Settlement Act. There are multiple master directions with respect to all of the payment products which we have discussed. We have a cybersecurity framework specifically designed for all the banks and the data protection requirements. There are regional regulatory bodies for Bangladesh. They have a central bank for them. There's a central bank for Sri Lanka and Nepal. There are compliance requirements like know your customer, anti-money laundering, data localization is one of the most important, where in India, RBI has mandated that data has to be stored in India. Payment and transaction data has to be stored in India. And then there are international standards like PCI DSS, NIST, Cybersecurity Framework, and Basel III. Okay, sorry. Coming to emerging threats and the challenges. So now the frauds have become more sophisticated. The social engineering, so these are called advanced persistent threats. These are persistent but are becoming advanced day by day using technologies in place. We have swim swapping, we have phishing, account takeover frauds. Coming to technology-driven, there are API-related frauds, which are two. API security has to come into effect. Mobile malwares, man-in-the-middle attack, deepfake technologies. Operational challenges are also there in terms of interoperability, scalability, regulatory compliances to follow. To tackle these emerging threats, AI/ML in payment security has been getting adopted from few years. So AI/ML has been implemented in fraud detection algorithms, Machine learning is also being used to identify the frauds and patterns. And then we have product level implementation in terms of UPI has their own fraud risk engine, card has its own fraud risk engine, mobile banking and internet banking also has a fraud risk. And then there are certain challenges and opportunities. Basically, we have to bring down the false positive, data quality issues, and regulatory compliances. Sorry. Talking about future outlook and recommendations, basically, I think one of our colleagues talked about quantum cryptography. So quantum cryptography is being envisaged to improve payment security, biometric advancement in terms of multi-modal biometric authentication, blockchain integration, and then on the IoT payment security. Regulatory development in terms of there has to be a unified regional standards, harmonizing payment securities. There has to be a API-specific standards for financial services. Digital identity framework should be in place. And there has to be international payment security coordination for cross-border transactions. Some industry recommendations: continuous monitoring, collaborative defense, customer education, innovative balances, invest more on AI/ML, strengthen partnership, and enhance resilience. Some key takeaways would be the regulator leadership. There has to be a strong and oversight from a regulatory body. Technology innovations, basically advanced security technologies, has to be brought in place to implement payment security controls, industry collaboration, and last but not least, customer awareness. So this was from my side. Any further queries we can address outside. Thank you very much.